Hi and welcome to Tech Weeklies. The title of this talk is a mouthful. It started by being why I love Frontend in 2019, because I was like, oh, there's really cool things that happen in proposals, and I want to tell them to people. Then I was talking with Ossi one day, and we were noticing that the front-end flow was a bit too quiet in 2019. So the title became The Front-End Flow is Too Quiet in 2019, and I want to change that. Then I thought about it some more in the Galaxy Brain scheme, and I thought I want you to change that. So then I just concatenated everything together. I was like, let's just see what happens. So if that doesn't cover what the talk is about, I will tell you some motivation and what this is about, actually. So I'm trying to answer these three questions, basically. Or, well, not questions, all of them, but there are useful and tangible features that are getting added to the web platform, and they have been getting added for what I would consider 3 years now, and we still consider them modern. Like, people still consider Flexbox to be recent, even though it's been around for 7 years. CSS Grid has been around for like 6 years as well, in terms of specification. It first landed in IE, of all places, actually, and the old implementation still exists there. Please don't use it. But you can if you want. I don't know. Who am I to tell you? The second thing, of course, that we have to support different browsers, right? Like, and that doesn't just mean, oh, IE 11, which some of us have to support still, but it also means an expanding feature set into evergreen browsers. The features are going to get there eventually, which is definitely a little bit more upbeat than they're never going to get added because IE 11 isn't getting any features anymore. But nonetheless, that interaction of having to account for a feature not being there still exists fundamentally in the work we do today. And finally, how can we have a fruitful exchange in this environment, right? Like, to me, this is a big bummer in a way, because if I want to share something that's cool and new, well, first of all, it's considered cool and new when I actually think that it is something that solves tangible problems for users. So how can we have a nice exchange in an environment where the support is always going to vary and we have to do different things to account for the support? So these are the things I'm trying to answer, I'm trying to motivate a little bit today. And the things we're going to discuss for that, yes, thank you, Michael, is what the web is about, or what the web is about in my opinion, because I think that matters a lot when we talk about what we support on the web or what support even means on the web. Then I'm going to talk about some features that I think demonstrate the strengths, and they are recent features. I think they demonstrate the standards, the process, what the web is about, yet again. Then we're going to talk a little bit about progressive enhancement, which used to be a really cool phrase some years back, and I don't hear it as often, although nothing happened to it. Like, it's still sagging along. And if you don't know what it is, don't worry, we'll talk about it. And yeah, and hopefully we'll also get to cover how to apply this to have better discussions on front-end. Let's see how we do about that. So for me, the reason I love working on the web is that the web can adapt to the user. And the web can adapt to the user whether it is because of their device or their screen size or their modalities and abilities. You can use the web on your Apple Watch if you want, and technically it would work. Would it really? Who knows? But that is what the web is about fundamentally. It is open. People are able to, publish on it relatively freely, HTML and so on. So I think we should really look into that and think about what does the web want to be in that context when we think about features being added and so on. I'm going to run you through some modern features that I love personally that you might have heard about. The first one is CSS scroll snap. The description is from Can I Use. It's basically a technique that allows you to snap certain subpages of the viewport into different sites. So concretely, what I mean is there's a really nice post by Nolan Lawson here. Let me make that full screen. See that nice cat there. Basically, it allows you to do this scrolling and snapping natively on the web. It's something that has existed in, say, mobile applications for a while. You can now do that natively on the web, and it's actually supported in like 70% of the browsers, I want to say. Let's find it afterwards. And the cool thing about this, you can even say right there, they mention carousels right in that sentence. Because this is a big part of what the web standard process is about. It's about providing low-level primitives for people to solve real use cases that they have, sort of eliciting use cases from people, saying, what are you trying to solve? I don't think carousels are a good idea. Data doesn't tell, it says they're not a good idea anyway, but people end up doing them. So, when we do that, what cost is the user paying? A slick carousel, very, very popular implementations like 30 kilobytes of JS, basically implementing physics. Like, that's what 30 kilobytes, like, the user doesn't really care about the physics and the 30 kilobyte JS that we're shipping to them to get this carousel that they're never going to scroll past, maybe, perhaps, who knows. And so CSS scroll snap points solves that directly for that use case, but it actually goes further. So there is another property within the scroll snap module called scroll margin and scroll padding. So you know sometimes when you link to sections in your page, if you link to a header, it's going to go all the way to the top where the viewport is, and that's going to be really annoying. If you have a sticky header, it's going to get hidden by the sticky header because that's how layout works. So you would want that thing to have margin and padding for the purposes of scrolling, but not for the purposes of other layout. Scroll margin, scroll padding, there we go. Actually, we are using it in the Tammerforce Promise side of all places, because I was making that change the other day. They have this really nice, like smooth scroll, whatever, navigation, and you want that to give some space at the top. So that one is scroll margin and scroll padding. And you know what? It helps like 80% of the browsers where it works, and the other 10%, 20%, nothing bad happens if it's not supported. The browser, when it doesn't understand the CSS property, it just goes on with its life. Like, that's how it works. Same with HTML as well. So I love that. I really like that. By solving a concrete use case, we got even better primitives for other use cases. And the CSS spec is structured into modules, so things move around modules quite often because we discover like more general use cases or other use cases and so on. But let's talk about the JS side of things. So there is another API that I love. It's called Intersection Observer. Definitely my favorite of the observers. It's a family of APIs. There's Intersection Observer, Resize Observer, Performance Observer. The core idea of these are let's talk about Intersection Observer first. So Intersection Observer solves the use case where you want to monitor the visibility of a DOM element. If you want to do that without Intersection Observer, you listen to scrolling on the body or on the document, which sounds horrible in terms of performance, and it is. Then you need to remember to debounce that, which again, you have to implement correctly, and so on and so forth. So at the end, you have a fair amount of code of maybe dubious quality, at least in terms of being tested in different places. And this is such a good example. This one says, hey, people want to know if something is visible or not. Let's provide a low-level JS API for them to do that. It's asynchronous by default, so you cannot get it wrong. Like, you cannot hog the main thread with an intersection observer, even if you tried. So concretely, you can do things like implementing native lazy loading, which I hadn't loaded the page earlier because I forgot. So let me do that now. Let's say photos. Yes, so this is actually, we have this live in production. You can build native lazy loading with it. So these things only get downloaded if the user is scrolling to them, and it doesn't hog the main thread. The only reason it's slow is because it's Hangouts, I promise. It's not my code that is slow in this case only. And you can see that the things above now haven't downloaded. So that's Intersection Observer. And there's other observers as well that solve similar use cases. So resize observer checks the size of elements, which again is super expensive because document get bounding client rectangle is insanely expensive. It causes layout. It's not a good idea to use. The cool thing about intersection observer, is truly my favorite observer, is supported in like 80% of the browsers or 70. It's going to be in Safari like next week, I promise. No, I don't promise. I don't know anything about that. The polyfill is very interesting because the polyfill for intersection observer is basically the thing we were doing before. Add a listener to the body, debounce it correctly, standardize through the polyfill, and expose the intersection observer API. So for browsers that don't support it, it's like 5 kilobytes, which is about the size of the code that you would be sweeping anyway, and it's no worse than it was before. So, you know, you might say, 70, 80% bad, not good enough, but they're going to get extremely good performance, standardized, and the other 20% still gets a comparable experience. You could even say that you do something else. You do pagination instead of lazy loading if it's not supported. I don't know. There are different ways to do the fallbacks, is my point. One more thing that I checked last week. Again, in the spirit of giving low-level primitives, Blink is now testing native lazy loading in the browser. And I looked through their implementation like a few weeks ago into the C++ whatevers, and they were calling out to intersection observer to implement it, which is wild. Like, how optimized must this be for them to actually be able to use it internally? And this is the promise of the web standards, right? We provide the low-level primitives and we encode the common use cases for people to use. And if it's supported natively, You won't need the scripts for this use case. You won't even need JavaScript to lazy load things, which is good because like JavaScript can fail. Or if you're server-side rendering, nobody has JavaScript until the scripts have downloaded, parsed, and executed. So yes, my favorite observer. Please go out and meet them. They are great. Logical CSS properties. So basically they define, instead of saying left, right, top, bottom, you say start, end, and then the writing mode will adapt based on that. To give you a concrete example, have you used Flexbox? Yes? Okay, good. In Flexbox, have you ever wondered why we say start and end instead of left and right? Those are the logical properties, because Flexbox, by default, when it was being designed, it was accounting for different writing modes. I know in English we use left to right, Arabic, Hebrew, Farsi, so many other languages, right to left. Traditional Japanese writing systems, maybe top to bottom. So the sense of left and right is such a big lie that actually we're accounting for that, like the specs are adapting. And the beautiful thing about this, again, it started in Flexbox. It's being moved into the more general module of the CSS spec that is about layouts on the block level. And actually, the next thing the CSS working group is tackling is the inline level as well. But that's happening at some point in the future. And I can't even express how much I love this. This is such a good idea that we explored something. It gave us better layout for the Flexbox. Grid has this as well. Vertical centering, people like vertical centering, right? You can do it in Flexbox and Grid. It's also getting backported into the more general like block model or whatever. I don't know what part of the module it's actually going at. We're going to have it soon, maybe. Who knows? So good. And this solves a concrete problem. This is not just theoretical purity, right? This is like, for so many people on the web right now, we're not serving them well. And this allows us to do that with a very iterative process. CSS custom properties, time permitting. I'm not going to go through them too much. Annoyingly, you will see, can I use, has them as CSS variables in the URL. So custom properties are often called CSS variables. The practical use cases are variables, but actually it's underselling them a bit because they're actual properties. And the same with the custom elements are elements in the HTML. But I won't go into that in too much detail. I will tell you one concrete use case from Olavi's Uncle Metroriki, actually. You can use this for themes. So CSS custom properties are not like Sass, like variables. They are not static. They are dynamic, and they cascade just as much as any other thing in CSS does. So it means that if I have theme light and I define my variables here, then I can have a button that sets the class theme dark, and everything cascades. And you can pierce through really deep DOM hierarchies by doing this. There are, again, even more advanced use cases with these things. In the future, the browser is going to expose their paint pipeline that you can control through custom properties. That could be a talk by itself, so I'll just give you links at the end. It's fantastic. It's beautiful. And it could allow us, for example, to polyfill existing properties that are not supported everywhere more easily because we can now hook into that part of the pipeline and do it sort of ourselves. But let's not go down this rabbit hole because it's a lot. List all the things. There's even more things that I could talk about, but I'm not because I'm running out of breath already. CSS Grid, WebAssembly, I think that's really going to change a lot of the things we do, even if it's just hot paths right now in the code. Feature policies, they allow us to limit the scope of the web platform, which is a first. Like a big problem, I would say, also for the platform is that we cannot actually break existing things. Feature policies allow you to say that for this website, I don't want, for example, synchronous XHR requests, which you could apply if you're serving ads and you don't want them to hog them in thread, and so on. Feature policies are really cool. Look them up. Source types for JS modules, Gap in Flexbox is already working in Firefox, and that came from CSS Grid. Vertical centering, variable fonts, client heads, scheduling, effective connection types. Those are just some things I randomly thought about 10 minutes ago, so, not an exhaustive. And I know what you're thinking. IE19 OMG SAD, that's my abbreviation for I need to support IE in 2019. OMG, why can I have a nice things? I'm sad. Bit of a mouthful, so please feel free to use the hashtag ever. Like, I just came up with it. Who the heck knows? But yes, and okay, I get it. I have to support IE11. And you know why I have to support IE11? Not because I care about the stereotype of a computer in a corporate office that has service pack whatever and can't update. The reason I care about IE11 is that most of the assistive technology in the term of screen reader, users on Windows are still stuck on IE 11 because when Microsoft moved to Edge, they didn't move the accessibility APIs. So yes, a lot of like screen reader users are on IE 11, and it's double depressing like, when I think about it. But even with that, that's not the reason to give up for me. For me, that's the reason to get excited about this thing and say, okay, concretely, how do we make this work now? And I think progressive enhancement, which again is this idea that where you have support, you make the things better, and where you don't have support, you plan for it. It's like, think of it as states in your application. Do I have support or do I not have support? What do I do with it? And that does not mean that you should make things look the same in every browser, in every support. It actually, for me, means the opposite of that. It means you cannot have the things be the same everywhere. So embrace that. For example, I had a talk on Grid a few months ago. For me, if I'm using CSS Grid, I can make my layout really cool and efficient for 90% of the users, concretely now. And then, I don't know, for IE, is it fine if the multi-column grid is a single column? I don't know, maybe it is. Like, for our use case, it's fine. And it will vary based on your use case. But that's the thing that I'm saying is that it's more of an attitude than a technique. The technique will matter a lot on the thing you're doing. You know, like, I cannot tell you, I cannot anticipate what you're building right now and tell you do this or do that. But there are always ways, and the standards account for that. I'm going to tell you about my second favorite HTML element. The favorite one is details and summary, but that's a different talk. It's the picture element. You have the picture element, and inside of it you have the source, and then you have the image. Now, the picture element allows you to have different types of media and different resolutions of media, of images specifically. When they were designing it, they decided that the canonical source for the alternative text and the fallback is going to be an image tag within the picture. In the browser, if the browser doesn't understand what picture means, it just treats it as a generic div. It doesn't discard it. It's like, okay, this might as well be a div. I'm not going to attach any special behavior to that. Now, it's going to encounter source. Source doesn't have any content, so it's not going to get displayed. And then it's going to find image. And it's going to be like, I know how to use an image. And it's going to display the image, which is amazing that they thought about this. There's a really nice part of image performance by Matt Marquis. He was the chairman of the working group on responsive images. And he basically explains that. I was like, I never thought about it, but that is beautiful. This works in like IE 10 and 11 or whatever doesn't have the picture because of that design. And there are polyfills for the picture element if you want to do something very specific and advanced that I'm not going to detail. But so many people polyfill it, or so many people will tell you it doesn't work in IE. I saw that the other week. Somebody was saying picture doesn't work in IE 11. We're not going to use it. It's like, it's designed so that you can use it and make things more awesome. Even within that, you see this type attribute here? This type attribute says image WebP and image JPEG. This is an open-ended attribute, which means that the browser, which means that you can add new image formats without having to change the spec. If the browser doesn't understand what image WebP means, it's going to be like, whatever. I know image JPEG, I'm going to use image JPEG. Do I not know what source is? I'm going to use the image. It's a fantastic instance of progressive enhancement right in the spec. And I can guarantee you that all of the things I showed you today have exactly this sort of path for enhancing the experience for everyone. And I think we can learn something from the website here, right? Like, I think that when we're discussing these things, if we can have this a little bit of progressive enhancement in our discussions, we can have better discussions. We can have more inclusive discussions about the front end. Briefly, how do I think about it as a discussion tool is, sharing something online. And I'm not saying that we're not doing this well, by the way. I'm just saying, in my experience, it would be cool if we did this, just to be clear. Is that, level 1, here's the thing I found. Cool. What do you think of that link? Here's the thing and what I think of it. I like it. Or, this sucks. That's a valid opinion, I guess. I don't know. Like, maybe. Better yet, here's the thing I found. I like it because it solves my use case. I often do that in the FIBA team, actually. I will just post something and say, here's the thing that we're probably not going to have in our code base for another half a year. But actually, it would help us a lot in this and that and the other thing. Or if we had this a year ago, it would have been really cool. Maybe I don't get to change that code anymore, but I can at least think how I would have used it. And similarly, when you see something shared, right, about on say the front end or whatever, it's like you see a better link. What did you think of that link? Like, I guess you liked it because you shared it, but it could be that you really disagree with it, and that's why you shared it. I don't know. But what would you use it for? Also, concretely, what would you as the reader use that thing for? Would that thing be useful to you? Would that thing be dangerous in some situations? Like, there are proposals that could be completely abused sometimes. Who knows? And also, if you are inclined to ask about IE 11 and how sad I am that I have to support it, then what does the enhancement look like? Like, I think that's a very cool question to try and answer when we look at new things being added. And I think, for me, that's one of the things that leads us to think that things that come out now are labeled as cool. I tend to often do that when I think that I don't get to use it for a while. I would be finding it more cool and more useful if I was using it. So what does the enhancement look like in that case? I think that's a very interesting question to ask people, or even try to answer yourselves. I'm going to recap a little bit. So there are some useful and tangible features that you can use today. And I'm saying useful and tangible and not recent, because I think most of these have existed for a few years. Progressive enhancement is alive and well, in case you were wondering. There is always the path to enhance up to the full support. And I want us to channel our excitement more in these cases. Like, I want us to be sharing things that we think are useful, even if they're not fully baked, even though we're not using them, today in production, even though we don't know how to use them in production. Somebody else might know. And that's the sort of atmosphere I want to have about frontend. I don't know. Some references. The Extensible Web Manifesto, it was a little bit of a mind shift a few years ago as to how the standards are written. It goes a lot into detail about providing low-level primitives and also like codifying existing use cases and so on. There's a nice demo on CSS snap points, Max Kohler. If you watch one thing today from the references, watch Elika J. Etmad's primer on internationalization. Top underrated spec contributor. She has written so much on the grid implementations, on bidirectional writing modes, currently working again sort of in the inline direction of things. It's a really good talk, and also very short, it's like 20-something minutes, that goes over how much the web does by default that you would not think about with regards to writing modes, writing systems, and so on. It really made me appreciate the web a little bit more when I read that. Rachel Andrew has done some fantastic writing on, well, everything layout related, but good article on understanding sort of the logical properties and how they mix with the existing layout methods. CSS Tricks also was written about that. And Matt Marquise's Image Performance, a really good and tiny book, like an ebook, it's like $8 from a book apart. Interesting because it has practical advice about responsive images on the web, but it also has a fantastic insight into the standards process, and I really, really recommend that book. P.S. If you want to read some specs, if that sounds interesting to you, let me know. I don't know. Let's try to do something. Why? I like reading specs. They're fun. What do you do with your lives? But hey, whatever. That's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this. I really love your energy.
Yes, now I need to take a breath.
Do we have any questions here in Helsinki? At least I have one question about you said about that you have to support IE 11 because of the assistive technologies. Mm-hmm. So do you actually even have to support, because the only problem is with the layout. So do you actually have to do anything?
I have had that thought before, and it's like the worst thought ever. So here's the thing. Screen reader users are not necessarily blind. They can be visually impaired or sighted screen reader users that might be making more sense of the document like that. So yes, you kind of can, but yeah.